So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this month's Patch Tuesday update by Manage Engine. So, first of all, I would like to thank all of you for taking time off your busy schedules and joining in. So, here's a brief intro about me. I am Anupam Kundu, a product specialist at Manage Engine, and today I'll be your presenter. So, I'm also assisted by an expert panel who would be answering all your queries throughout the webinar. So if you have any doubts regarding the webinar, regarding the presentation, or any of our products, please feel free to ask via chat. So I'd like to tell you all that this is going to be a quick 45-minute session wherein we'll be discussing about the latest Patch Tuesday updates as well as the CVE IDs, and also we'll be discussing the Patch Tuesday deployment via Manage Engine's patch management solutions. Followed by this session of 45 minutes, we'll have a question and answer session wherein our expert panel would be answering all your queries. So let's begin. First, let's talk about the agenda of today's webinar. We'll start with the latest cybersecurity news. We'll have a look at the latest cybersecurity news that made the headlines across the world. Followed by this, we'll have a detailed breakdown of Microsoft's Patch Tuesday updates for August 2022. Next, we'll be discussing the impacts and effects as well as the CVIDs. We'll be listing out the CVIDs as well as, and we'll be discussing the impacts and effects that missing these patches can have on the systems. And then we'll be sharing some of the best practices for patch management that you can use to secure the hybrid networks. And last but not the least, as I already mentioned, we'll have a question and answer session wherein all your queries will be answered by your expert panel. So let's go ahead. Now, the need for cybersecurity requires no introduction. With rising cyber attacks being a constant, admins have no choice but to be vigilant at all times. With that in mind, let's have a look at the top cybersecurity news that made the headlines from across the world. So first up, we have the US Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA's, warning of the UNRWA software which is being actively exploited in the Linux systems. Recently, CISA has added a security flaw in the UNRWA software to its known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. Now, this vulnerability has been tracked as CVE 2022-30333, and this has been assigned a CVSS score of 7.5. So basically, threat actors can exploit this vulnerability to drop arbitrary files just by simply decompressing the file on the targeted systems that have this UNRWA software installed. Now, while not much has been known about the nature of this vulnerability, CISA says in their advisory that the RAR lab UNRWA on Linux and Unix are susceptible to the exploitation. Moving on to the next news item. So we have reports of two vulnerabilities as old as 5 years that are being exploited to distribute a malware dropper called Smoke Loader. So while we know that unpatched vulnerabilities are a dream for threat actors, we have something similar at hand now. So these two vulnerabilities, as nearly old as 5 years, and are tracked and have been tracked as CVE 2017-0199 and CVE 2017-11882. These two vulnerabilities are being exploited actively to distribute a malware dropper smoke loader. Now, it is to be noted that the patches for these flaws are already available, yet the threat actors are leveraging the unpatched systems to carry out with the exploitation. Now, speaking of smoke loader, this, ladies and gentlemen, is a popular malware dropper that paves the way for distribution of other severe varieties of malware in the affected systems. Hence, it is always recommended to patch vulnerabilities as soon as the patches are available, and also to run a compliance check for old and unpatched flaws. That's it. We're done with the latest cybersecurity news section. Let's talk about the Microsoft support and Windows lifecycle. So as you can see on your screen, ladies and gentlemen, the active support and security support For Windows 10, version 1909 for enterprise and education, and for Windows 10, version 21H1 for enterprise and education and home, pro, and pro for workstations. I repeat, the Windows 10 version 1909 for enterprise and education and Windows 10 version 20H2 for home, pro, and pro for workstations. Its active support and security support ended on the 10th of May 2022. So users who are still on these old versions kindly consider migrating to newer versions such as Windows 10 version 21H1 or Windows 11. Also, Microsoft has announced the release of Windows 10 version 22H2 in the later half of 2020, that is during the fall. Now, let's talk about the 0 days that have been patched this month. So we saw in our Patch Tuesday update that a total of 20 days have been patched in August 2020. First up, we have the 0-day vulnerability in Microsoft Support Diagnostic Tool, and this can cause remote code execution if left unpatched. So this vulnerability has been tracked as CVE 2022-34713. And now speaking of this 0-day bug, this is a path traversal flaw that allows the attackers to copy an executable file to the Windows startup folder when the target opens a maliciously created file with the extension .diagcab or .diagcab. We all know that .diagcab is an extension of the files that are used by MSDT. Also, this file is sent to the target either via mail or is downloaded from the internet. Now, on the next Windows restart, the malicious file automatically gets executed. So researchers at Microsoft have jokingly named this vulnerability, this 0-day bug, as dog walk. Moving on to the second and the last 0-day vulnerability, we have this 0-day in Microsoft Exchange that can cause information disclosure. Tracked as CVE 2022-30134, this has been publicly disclosed, and yet no reports of active exploitation have come up. But by leveraging this 0-day bug, threat actors can read targeted email messages on the targeted systems. Next, talking about the critical vulnerabilities that have been patched in August 2022, we see a total of 17 critical vulnerabilities across the Microsoft atmosphere, including Windows and Exchange Server and many others. We'll talk about that. So first, let's have a look at the 17 critical vulnerabilities, the 5 vulnerabilities mentioned here, with 4 of them being from Microsoft Windows and 1 from Microsoft Exchange Server. I'll pause for a while so that you guys can take a note or a screenshot of it. Also, all of this data is available in ManageEngine's Patch Tuesday forum post and ManageEngine's Patch Tuesday blog. The links of the forum posts and the blog will be shared via chat in some time. Here are some other critical vulnerabilities we see again in Microsoft Windows and Exchange Server, and this can cause RCE as well as elevation of privilege. Now, the updates are available as either security updates or through monthly rollups. Here's a look at the third slide with Microsoft Windows as well as Exchange Server. And let's move on to the last 2 critical vulnerabilities of the second of the 17 that have been patched. We see one in Azure Batch that can cause elevation of privilege, and the one in Microsoft Exchange Server. So let's take a roundup or a detailed breakdown of this Patch Tuesday. So we saw that a total of 121 vulnerabilities have been patched through 177 patches released this Patch Tuesday. And if left unpatched, these 121 vulnerabilities can have 6 different forms of impact combined on the exploited systems. Here's a look at the operating systems and the applications that were affected. So we see that 46 vulnerabilities have been found in Microsoft Azure, while just 1 in developer tools, that too in .NET 6.0. Next, we have 25 in Microsoft Edge, with 6 in Microsoft Exchange Server, 4 in Microsoft Office, and Microsoft Visual Studio has got 4 vulnerabilities with just one in System Center. But in case of Microsoft Windows, we got 61 vulnerabilities this month. Looking at the patches by impact, as I mentioned earlier, that if left unpatched, these vulnerabilities can have six different forms of impact combined on the exploited systems, starting with 7 vulnerabilities that can cause denial of service, while 66 vulnerabilities that can cause elevation of privilege, 13 causing information disclosure, 32 causing remote code execution, and 7 vulnerabilities causing security feature bypass, and just one causing spoofing. Classifying the patches by severity, we see that the patches this time have been rated as 85.5% of them being critical, being important, while just 13.7% of them being critical. Now, dear folks, let's take a look at the operating systems and applications patched. We'll discuss about the CVIDs as well as the severities of the vulnerabilities. We'll begin with Microsoft Azure. First up, we can see that the Microsoft Azure vulnerabilities have been rated as critical, moderate, and important. And these can cause RCE, that is remote code execution, denial of service, information disclosure, as well as elevation of privilege if left unpatched. Let's take a look at the CVIDs. So the one that has been highlighted, that is CVE 2022-33646, is a critical vulnerability in my Azure. I'll pause for a while. Moving on to the next slide. None of the 6 vulnerabilities remaining in this slide are critical. So we see that only one critical vulnerability has been found in Microsoft Azure. Moving on to the next application, we see one vulnerability, that is one CVID for Microsoft for developer tools that can cause spoofing and has been rated as important. So this vulnerability is found in .NET 6.0. Talking about Microsoft Edge, the vulnerabilities have been classified as moderate, important, and low, and can cause RCE, security feature bypass, as well as elevation of privilege. Let's take a look at the CVEIDs. So we found no critical vulnerabilities in Microsoft Edge. Again, I would like to reiterate that, ladies and gentlemen, all of these details, including the CVEIDs, can be found in Manage Engine's Patch Tuesday forum post, the links which I believe have already been shared via chat. Speaking about Microsoft Exchange Server, we find critical as well as important vulnerabilities that can cause information disclosure and elevation of privilege in the exploited systems, with 3 of these that have been highlighted being the critical vulnerabilities, while the rest 3 of other less severities. Moving on to Microsoft Office, we have 4 vulnerabilities with critical, moderate, and important severities. We'll take a look at the CVIDs now. And next, we move on to Microsoft Visual Studio. Again, here we have 4 vulnerabilities, while none of them are critical, but have been rated as important. And if left unpatched, these can cause remote code execution. Here's a list of the CVIDs. And finally, we come to the System Center vulnerability, just one that has been rated as important and can cause elevation of privilege. Talking about the Microsoft Windows vulnerabilities, we saw there were almost 60 plus vulnerabilities, and these have been rated as either critical or important and can cause a plethora of impacts if left unpatched, that is the RCE, denial of service, elevation of privilege, information disclosure, as well as security feature bypass. Here's a look at the CVIDs for the Windows vulnerabilities. As again, I'd like to say that the highlighted vulnerabilities are critical. This being the last of the Microsoft Windows vulnerabilities. Here we can see that a total of 6 vulnerabilities have been identified as critical. Now, let's take a look at the third-party updates for Windows that have been released. So we see some major vendors such as Mozilla, as well as Cisco, WebEx, Adobe releasing updates. All of this information, the list of the entire third-party updates, is available on Manage Engine's forum post. That is the Patch Tuesday, August 2022 forum post. Here are a couple of other third-party updates for Windows as well. Let's move on to the Mac updates, the third-party updates for Mac. We see updates from major vendors such as Firefox, Skype, Adobe, as well as Opera. Speaking of the non-security Office updates, we see just two, that is for Microsoft Office 2013 and 2016, along with their respective KBs. Ladies and gentlemen, I am elated to announce that of the total patches released, a total of 571 patches have been released in August 2022 altogether, and all of these patches are supported by Manage Engine's patch management solutions, that is Endpoint Central, Patch Manager Plus, and Vulnerability Manager Plus. Now, as you can see on your screens, the graph clearly depicts the steep rise in vulnerabilities each year. So as we can see, a total of 15,044 vulnerabilities have been reported till August 2022. Such an alarming rise in vulnerabilities only iterates the fact that is the dire need for patching to protect the endpoints in a network. With that being said, let's have a look at the best practices for patching that you can use to patch your hybrid networks. First of all, as a thumb rule, always test the patches before deploying them to your production machines. Now, what is this testing of patches and how do you create a test group? We'll come to that. We'll show you the testing and approval of patches, as well as the creation of test group using Manage Engine's patch management solutions later in the webinar. But for now, as I mentioned, as a thumb rule, always test the patches before deploying them to the production machines. Now, a test group shall contain, that is, must contain all of the flavors of and the versions of the operating systems that are being used in your network. So once the patches have been tested successfully in the test groups, they can be deployed safely to the production machines. Next, always prioritize the deployment of the security and the critical updates for all the machines. All other updates, that is feature packs, monthly rollups, they can be deployed based on the regular deployment schedules in your organization, but security and critical updates must be prioritized. Next, always synchronize the patching schedules with the monthly patch Tuesdays. So what is this synchronization of patching schedules with the monthly patch Tuesdays? So Manage Engine's patch management solutions offer two different types of weekly split for deployment policies. One is the regular weekly split, and the second is the patch Tuesday based weekly split. We'll demonstrate all of that in the later section of the webinar. But for now, what happens when you synchronize the patching schedules with the monthly patch Tuesdays? So by syncing them, you can ensure that the patches are tested, approved, and deployed as soon as they're released in the patch Tuesdays. And this gives you a head start for achieving patch compliance in your networks. Number 4, it is always advised to set a broad deployment window or deployment windows for the remote missions, as well as to choose non-business hours, that is non-office hours, to patch servers. Last but not the least, always allow the users to postpone deployments and reboots. So many a time what happens is that a set of users in your organization, in our organization, might be stuck with some business critical task. So forcing deployment or reboots on them during that time might cause serious productivity drop or productivity issues. And as sysadmins, we definitely don't want that. But then we also have to maintain the system health compliance, right? So for that, it is highly recommended to allow the users to have an option to postpone the deployments and the reboots. With that being said, let's now take a look at how to deploy the patches that were released this Patch Tuesday using Manage Engine's Patch Manager Plus. We also have two other, as you all know, that we also have a set of different patch management solutions from Manage Engine, that is Endpoint Central, Patch Manager Plus, as well as Vulnerability Manager Plus. We'll describe all of these products at the end of the webinar. But now let's head on to the Patch Manager console to discuss some of the features. First, we'll be discussing the testing of patches, and I'll also show you how to create a test group on the Patch Manager Plus console. So this is Manage Engine's Patch Manager Plus, and I am using the version 10.1.2138.2. This is how the homepage looks. We have listed the network patch status, system health graph, and we have also listed the missing patches by the severity and vulnerability. On the right side of the screen, you can check the latest security news right from the console homepage. And by clicking on these, you'd either be directed to the Patch Tuesday, to the Manage Engine forum posts or the Manage Engine blogs. Okay, so let's get back. So I was talking about the testing and approval of patches. All right, so for that, we'll click on deployment from the top menu, and then we'll click on test and from the left pane. As you can see that test groups have already been created. Let's go ahead and create a new test group by clicking on the add group button. Now, the first task is to choose a deployment, choose a platform. As you can see that we offer 3 different platforms, that is Windows, Mac, and Linux. So let's go with Windows. Next, we'll have to choose a group. You can either choose a group that has already been created from the drop down, or you can go ahead and create a new custom group. Let's create a new custom test group by clicking on create custom groups. As the screen loads, you can see a list of the custom groups that have already been created. We'll create a new group by clicking on the create new group button. First, let's select a good name for our custom group. Say org 822 custom group test group TG. All right. Okay, you can add in a description if you want. Next is to choose the category of this group. So as you can see that we have 3 different options, that is static, static unique, and dynamic. So always, ladies and gentlemen, choose either a static or a static unique group for a test group and never dynamic. So why not a dynamic? Let's explore. So if you choose on dynamic, you can see that a dynamic test group or a dynamic group is based on a certain set of criteria. So let's go ahead and select a criteria. Let's go with operating system equals with Windows 10. What happens is that if I save it, it means that any test group, any test, sorry. So if I save it, what happens is that any Windows endpoint, that is Windows 10 endpoint that gets added to the network will already be made a part of the dynamic test group. And definitely we don't want that. So we'll stick to static or static unit. Let's go with static. Next, we'll be importing the computers, the Windows machines right from here. I'm choosing random machines for demo purposes. Sincerely hope you guys don't do that. And now we'll click on save. You see that our test group has been created successfully. Now that we have created the test group, let's go ahead and create the testing and approval feature. We'll click on deployment, as I mentioned earlier, and we'll choose on test and approve from the left pane. Now, let's create this. We'll choose our already created group. I believe it was called August, all right? I guess this one was August 2020. Next, we'll choose the updates. So you can see that we have options for choosing Microsoft updates, third-party updates based on their severities, as well as antivirus updates and driver updates. We'll be choosing the critical and important ones for Microsoft updates. You can obviously choose as per your needs. We'll be doing the same for third-party updates as well. Next, we see a list of the antivirus updates that Manage Engine offers. Do note that the antivirus updates and driver updates are available currently for the Windows endpoints. The next step is to choose the deployment criteria. So now by putting in an n number of days, let's go with 2, I choose to deploy the patches after 2 days from vendor release. Once that's done, we'll select a deployment policy. You can either choose a deployment policy right from the drop-down, or you can create or modify a new policy. All right, let's go with June PD 2022. Now you can either choose to enable the notification settings, which is an optional setting. So if you choose to enable the notification settings, just click on enable notification and put in the email addresses wherein you'd like to be notified about the testing and approval feature. And if you have already downloaded and configured the Patch Manager Plus mobile application that is available on Google Play Store as well as App Store, you can just select the technicians right from the mobile application, and then they would be notified via the app. And the last step is to choose the approval mode for the tested batches. So if you want the tested batches to be automatically approved, just click the checkbox and put in the number of days. Let's say I go with 2. So I choose to automatically approve the tested batches after 2 days. Once that's done, let's have a quick check and then we'll click on create. All right, I guess there's some problem with the server. Let me refresh this. Okay, there's some issue with the email. All right, I might have put in a different email address. All right, oh, okay, I did not put in an email address. Let's put in my email address, anupam.kp. That's so. Okay, and let's create. And as you can see that our test group has been created successfully. That is the org 2022 teaching. All right, let's head back to the console now. Okay, now let's discuss about one more feature, one more exclusive feature that Manage Engine offers. So as you remember, I told you about the Patch Tuesday based split for the deployment policies. We'll be demonstrating that, and we'll also be talking about the automated patch deployment feature of the patch management solution. Heading back to our console again. Now, before I start, I'd like to tell you all that creation of an automated patch deployment task is a two-step process. The first step is to create a deployment policy as per your organization's needs. And secondly, the task is to associate the deployment policy with an automate patch deployment task. So let's go ahead and create a new deployment policy. The steps are the same. We'll click on deployment from the top menu, and then we'll click on deployment policies from the left pane. Here is a list of the deployment policies that have already been created. Let's go ahead and create a new policy. First, let's rename it. Going with org. All right, save it. Now, here comes the fun part. So as we can see that there are two different types of splits, that is weekly splits. One is the regular split, wherein if you choose the regular split, the weeks would be listed as first, second, third, fourth, and last of the month. And then we also have the days, that is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. You can choose in the deployment window and try to keep this as broad as possible for seamless deployment. You can add more than one schedules by clicking on the add more schedules button. That's done. Now, what is this based on Patch Tuesday split that Manage Engine offers? So once you click on it, you'll be seeing that the weeks would be listed based on the Patch Tuesday. So if we can see that the weeks have been listed as Patch Tuesday week, first week, second week, third, and last after the Patch Tuesday. We'll leave the Patch Tuesday week for testing and approval, and we'll go with the first, second, and third for deployment. Next, we'll be choosing days for deployment, and then the deployment window. Again, I said, as I mentioned earlier, let's keep it as broad as possible. The next step is to choose how you want the patches to be downloaded from the server to the agent. Now, you can either choose to download the patches from the server to the agent, either only during the deployment window or anytime the agent contacts the server. Let's go with the second option. And the last step is the initiation of deployment. Now, you can choose to initiate the deployment at either system startup, refresh cycle, that is the 90-minute refresh cycle, and either of these, whichever happens earlier. Let's go with system startup, and we'll click on save and continue. Now, we come to the next step of the creation of a deployment policy, that is the pre-deployment activities. So as the name suggests, what is this pre-deployment activity? So let's say you want to perform a set of actions on the endpoints before the deployment is about to happen. For that, we'll choose the actions right from this menu. We have wake on LAN if you want to wake the devices on LAN before deployment. We also have the pre-deployment reboot if you want the devices to be rebooted before the deployment happens. And third and last, we have the exclusive custom scripts option. So what is this custom script option? Let's say that you want certain certain custom actions to be happening on the endpoints before deployment is about to happen. Let's say you want a snapshot of the virtual machines. For that, all you have to do is to create a custom script and then add it to the script repository. You can then simply upload or choose the custom script from the script repository right here in this window. We'll choose the script arguments as well as the exit code, and we'll click on save and continue. So let's go with pre-deployment reboot for now. And okay, so in the pre-deployment reboot, we see the option to exclude the reboot, that is skip the reboot for certain machines that we feel don't require a reboot, or for servers. If you want to notify the users about the reboot, the pre-deployment reboot, you can simply click on the checkbox and you can put in the notification. You can add custom messages and you can also configure the notification timeout. Now we click on save and continue, and we come to the third step, that is the pre-deployment user notification. So if you choose to notify the users about the deployment, just click on the checkbox of, and then we'll have the message option where you can put in custom messages. As I mentioned that it is recommended to allow the users to skip deployment to prevent business production, to hamper the business product critical tasks. So for that, you can just click on the checkbox here that says allow users to skip deployment. And lastly, if you want to show the deployment progress on the client systems, you can click on this checkbox. Click on save and continue. And then we come to the last step, that is the post-deployment activity. So this post-deployment activity basically means a list of functions, list of activities that you want to be happening to the endpoints after the deployment has been done. You can choose post reboot or shutdown, or you can choose to perform a custom script, custom action using ManageEngine's exclusive custom script feature. Like taking a look at the post reboot or shutdown option, we see we have two different options, that is reboot or shutdown. You can either choose to force the reboot or delay the reboot. You can also add custom messages and choose the notification timeout. In case you want to exclude the reboots for certain machines or servers, you can click the checkboxes. Click on save and continue. And here's a brief of the deployment policy. Here's our OGDP policy, starting with the deployment schedule, as well as the pre and post deployment settings. Let's click on save and continue. And we are done with our creation of deployment policy. Now, as you'd remember, I earlier mentioned that creation of a automate patch deployment task is a two-step process. So first, you create the deployment policy, and then next, you associate this with an automate patch deployment task. So let's go ahead and select automate patch deployment from the left pane. Here are the list of the automate patch deployment tasks already created. Let's go ahead and create a new task. Click on the automate task button. As you can see, we offer 3 different platforms for automate patch deployment. We'll go with Windows. Now, let's name this task. Let's go with APD org on save. This will choose the Microsoft updates based on their severities. We'll do the same for the third-party updates. Here we have the antivirus updates and driver updates as usual. Now, if you want to deploy the patches after n number of days, either from release or from approval, you can just put in the number here. So by this, I mean to deploy the patches after 2 days from approval. That's done, and click on next. The next step is to choose a deployment policy. So I already showed you how to create a deployment policy. You can choose a deployment policy right from the dropdown, or you can create or modify a new policy. I believe ours was called OGDP. All right, this is it. Is a brief detail of this deployment policy. We also offer a suspend task after feature. Now, what is this feature? So let's say, dear folks, that you are creating an automate patch deployment task for your users that are working remotely. Now, what happens when the users come back? Obviously, when the users come back to the organization, their patching and deployment schedule would have to be according to the organization standards. So for that, what do we do to the automate patch deployment task? So in cases like that, all you have to do is click on the checkbox, and you can see that you can put in the suspend task after, that is the date and the hour, date and the time. I said so, date and the hour. So what happens is that if you put the custom date and the timing, the suspend task, the automate patch deployment tasks will be suspended after that particular time and the particular date. So let's say you want to suspend a task after 2 months. So all you have to do is to put in the date as well as the time. Next, our job is to select the targets. You can choose the targets, that is the remote officer domains, right from here. You can also choose to exclude certain targets, that is the domains as well as computers based on their computers, custom groups, as well as IP addresses using the filter options. The last step is to choose the notifications. You can choose to configure the notifications and can choose to notify about the download or deployment failure after every 3 hours, or you can put in a custom number of hours. If you want to attach detailed reports of the failures, you'll be seeing that we offer attachment of the reports in 3 different formats, that is PDF, CSV, as well as XLSX. You can attach the detailed reports with the emails, and then you'll just put in the email ID. Let's put in my email ID. And if you have already configured the mobile application, the Patch Manager Plus mobile application that is available on Google Play Store as well as App Store, just select the technicians right from this list, and the technicians would be notified via the mobile app. We'll click on Save. And as you can see, our APDOG Automate Patch Deployment task has been created successfully. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to tell you all that if you have any queries about the product, you can easily subscribe for a demo request, and our support team would be happy to give you a demo of the entire product. For that, all you have to do is subscribe to the demo request option after you close the webinar. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. So to summarize, the creation of an automated patch deployment task has 4 steps. The first step is to choose the applications based on their severities. You can also choose antivirus updates and driver updates. Next is to choose the deployment policy. You can either choose the regular split or manage engine's exclusive patched user split. The third option is to define the targets. You can choose to exclude the targets, exclude some of the targets based on their computers, IP addresses, and a lot more using the filters. And lastly, you can choose to configure the notifications. You can also choose to attach detailed reports of the automate patch deployment task failures with the, notifications via the email or the mobile application. Now, let's discuss about one more feature that Manage Engine offers, that is the filtering out of the Patch Tuesday updates. Let's at first go back to the console. We click on patches. So here is a view of the patches. As you can see, the missing patches, installed patches, applicable patches right in your organization. So let's say I want to check the patches that were released on Patch Tuesday. So for that, we can use the based on Patch Tuesday filter. For that, we'll click on the supported patches from the left pane. As this loads up, as the screen loads up, we can see a list of the supported patches in your organization. And now let's see how many of these patches were released on Patch Tuesday. We'll click on filters. We'll add a new filter by clicking on the plus button. You can rename the filter. You can just use that as it is. Let's go with release date is, and the value would be use a custom date, right? Let's go ahead with the custom date. That is the 10th. And this day patches were released, and we'll click on apply. Once the filter is added successfully, you can see a list of these patches that were released on the 10th of August 2020. You can always use these filters to choose and look for missing patches as well as installed patches in your system. You can choose any number of custom dates, or you can choose filters for other options as well, such as based on severity, application, hardware as such. Next, we'll have a look at another feature, that is a declining of patches. So why do we need this, and what is this? Now, many a time, there arises the need to decline certain applications. Let's say you don't want to deploy less critical patches to your machines, but if you choose to ignore them obviously they will end up affecting the system health compliance. And now also, certain applications running on other software, such as Java, might be unsupported with the latest updated version. So for scenarios like this, Manage Engine's patch management solutions bring the exclusive decline patches feature. Let's take a look at it. Go back to the Patch Manager Plus console. So for that, we'll click on Patches from the top menu and we'll choose on Decline Patch from the left pane. Here is a list of the groups that have already been created to decline patches. Let's go ahead and create a new group. Okay. First is we have to create a custom group for declining. You can either go on, you can choose a group from the drop down that has already been created, or you can click on the plus button to create a new group. Let's go with any random group. All right. You can put in a description if you want. The next step is to choose the patches right from this list. So as you can see, we offer declining of patches, applications, as well as entire families. Let's go ahead and add some patches in it. I've added the patches. Let's select some applications by clicking on the Add Applications button with the LAN Messenger. And next, we'll choose a family to decline. With the entire family. So as you can see, once we press on Next, we see the entire summary. We see that we have declined 8 patches, 5 applications, as well as 4 families for the custom. We'll just click on Save, and our decline patch feature, decline patch group, has been successfully created. Right? Now we'll move on to the console again, as into the presentation. So dear folks, as you can see on your screens, these are the solutions that Manage Engine offers for seamless patch management. We have our flagship product, Endpoint Central, which is a unified endpoint management and security solution. We also have an MSP version of the product. Here we have Patch Connect Plus that smoothly integrates with SCCM and Intune to ensure third-party patching. We have Vulnerability Manager Plus that you can use to scan and mitigate vulnerabilities and compliance issues in your network. And lastly, we have Patch Manager Plus, our standalone patch management solution that ensures seamless patching across the network. Now, dear folks, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask via chat. The expert panel, as well as myself, will be answering all your queries via chat. So Mr. Vipin asks if there is a, all right, thank you so much for your feedback, Mr. Vipin. And you ask if there is a way to get a recording of the session. So ladies and gentlemen, I would like to tell you again that the webinar has been recorded and it will be available in 1 to 2 working days on Manage Engine's site. We'll also be sharing the webinar to your emails. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to ask. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible. But be assured that if left unanswered, your answers would be sent over mail. So Joanne asks, how can I hold the Java patches from the rest of the patches in order to push them later on? So as I mentioned earlier, you can always use the decline patch feature that offers the declining of patches as well as applications and families. You can use that to hold the Java patches as well as any other patches that you want to be deployed, that you don't want to be deployed, that you don't want to be deployed to your endpoints. You can use the decline patches feature. Dan has asked for the Windows end of support. Yeah, Dan, obviously we'll be showing it. Just give me some time. I'll scroll back and we'll bring out that slide. So here is the Microsoft end of support, that is active support and security support slide. I hope this answers your queries. Also, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to tell you again that if you have any issues with the product demonstration, You can obviously sign, you can surely sign easily for a demo request, and our support team would be more than happy to help you out with a free demo of the entire product. To do that, all you have to do is to subscribe on the demo request button that will come up when you close the webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the positive feedback. Also, our team is trying to answer as many questions as possible, but be assured that if the questions are left unanswered, we'd be answering them via mail. Please feel free to ask more questions.